Welcome to part 3 of the series, What is Life? This part is looking at what separates a living being from non living things. What is alive? NASA's working definition for life is a self sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. Besides this, there are more than 100 definitions of life, trying to pinpoint and identify a living being, but experts do not agree on a single one of them. One of the three life detecting tests on Mars came positive in 1978 when NASA's Viking 1 spacecraft landed there. It has since been understood to be a false test. What makes detecting life so difficult? We do it so intuitively and can detect a caterpillar in a clutter. So, what are the experts fussing about? Experts want a definition of life that can be used for all life on Earth, including microbial life, and also detect life elsewhere in space. It is relatively easier to classify complex life on Earth, but not all life. You take a set of characteristics to define life, and life throws exceptions back at it. Take a look to appreciate the nuances and why experts are having such a tough time to define life. All life is able to make copies of itself and reproduce. This applies to life as a species, not to individual infertility cases. But then life throws many exceptions. For example, mules cannot reproduce, and none of us doubt that they are alive. Life has the ability to maintain stable internal systems, but non-living systems like Earth's own environment is also self-sustaining. In fact, we live within this self-sustaining system. Leaving pseudoscience aside, Earth is not a living biological entity. So a self-sustaining system is not a trait of only living beings. All life forms grow and increase in size while maintaining internal organized forms. Life made of a single cell grows large in size. Others accumulate more cells. But so are structures like crystals that not only grow but maintain their internal organized form. Life has metabolism. All living beings have chemical reactions happening inside cells to sustain life, to process food and generate energy, use it to run all cellular activities, to make and transport materials, to grow and make copies of itself. But viruses do not have a metabolism. Are they not alive without a host environment? Experts have different views on it. Life is responsive. It reacts to external stimuli, like us moving away from a hot surface, plants responding to touch. But many non living things also respond, like water responds to heat and cold. Even a phone responds to touch, but is not alive. Life should be capable of Darwinian evolution and complexify, but bacteria has not. As you can see, no feature alone is sufficient to accurately identify life on Earth. Like this, there are many other parameters, but they run into same problem. Take some of these collectively, like the famous Mrs. Grant criteria, that includes these 7 traits to identify life, and nature shows us fire and some infectious proteins, like prions, that qualify as life on many of these parameters. A limited set can either leave out some living categories or extends to even non-living systems. When best of minds could not agree on a definition of life, we must use the other approach. And remember, we have to identify everything that is alive on Earth to take to part 4 and look inside them to see what runs as life. So what we will do is take the features we humans show as being alive and identify which other beings show same life characteristics. And what do we find? That all life based on modern cell, all plants, marine life, birds, animals and fungus that came from a common ancestor shows all these characteristics to qualify as life. By the way, mules are just the end of a branch and fit nicely into evolution model. Now let us see how other organisms outside this group are classified on our imaginary line extending from non-life to life. Where can bacteria and viruses be placed on this line? Let's take bacteria first. A bacterium is a cell, reproduces by cell division, converts food into energy, so has metabolism, maintains its internal environment to sustain itself, so has homeostasis, It does not have nucleus but has DNA in the nucleoid. It evolves, but is just not able to complexify into other species. Bacteria and archaea have nearly all life characteristics of our cells. Bacteria are definitely alive. What about viruses? Like bacteria, are they alive too? It seems they are a puzzle of nature thrown at us. Viruses are just a DNA or RNA wrapped in a protein coat. When alone, they are nothing more than a box of biochemicals, like other raw materials of a cell. Once inside a host, they use its machinery to multiply and seem to behave like a living thing. They are a parasite. So, are they alive when inside a host? Argument in favor of viruses being alive is that just being a parasite is not enough to declassify them as non-life. What are we ourselves if not a parasite of the Earth's environment? Move us out of this host environment, we cannot survive. Isn't every life a parasite of its own environment? Viruses have no internal organs, no respiration, no metabolism. On their own, they show no signs of life. Viruses are like a cart that is attached to a vehicle. When attached, it moves just like a vehicle. When alone, it is just a stationary object. Viruses are like the cart. They seem alive only when attached to a living being. But on their own, viruses do not show traits of a living system. For this reason, viruses are not considered alive. A fish is alive in its host watery environment. Take a fish out of its host environment for some time, it dies. It cannot come back to life. A virus is active within its host environment, but take a virus out of its host, it becomes dormant. In this dormant state, they are no longer living, but are not dead either, and becomes active again when a new host is found. So during their lifetime, they switch between living and non-living state, unlike a fish, which is either dead or alive. Interestingly, like viruses, seeds can also remain dormant for tens or even hundreds of years, surviving without food or water, in vacuum of space, extreme underwater pressures, and can germinate when conditions are right. Seeds are a product of a living thing, but lack the capability to exist as a living system on their own. Seeds hold potential for life, but are not alive themselves. Then there are bacterial spores that are similar to seeds. When nutrition is lacking, a bacteria transforms into a dormant state, a seed-like structure with no metabolic activity, and some can stay that way for thousands of years. Viruses, seeds, spores, etc. belong to a special category. On their own, viruses do not show any trait of life. Today, scientific consensus is that viruses fall short of being alive, but are more than a piece of rock. In the same way, seeds and spores are not considered alive. While in dormant state, they are not living, but they are not dead either because they carry potential for life. That living potential can be killed while they are in non-living state. Maybe the living potential in viruses, seeds, spores is a transition state between life and non-life. Our imaginary line to detect separation point of life and non-life is more of a spectrum, representing a gradual transition from non-life to potentially living to life. It is interesting to note that all potentially living things before life category did not necessarily emerge before living things. In fact, viruses and spores emerged after bacteria. On the other hand, seeds are a product of life. In general, all these are just more than inert material, but less than a living being. There is no specific point in nature that separates life from non-life. Defining life or finding a starting point is irrelevant to nature. It might be a gradually fading line from life towards non-life. It is up to us to create a practical definition of life. From a biological perspective, a practical demarcation for life can be placed starting from prokaryotes, that is, the simple life forms of bacteria and archaea, extending into all complex life forms, the eukaryotes, that is, all plants, marine life, birds, animals, and fungus. This is life that existed on Earth since 3.8 billion years in some form or other. Just like everything in universe is made of atoms, everything that is alive on earth is made of cells. Using this definition of life, we will look next at what life force really is and what runs inside all living beings. Like some beliefs, is it really something that pre-exists and enters a body to make it alive? Answer from recent research in last few decades are coming up in part 4.